So welcome to my channel, everyone. This is Bruce the Boss Brooks. Sadly, over the weekend in Washington, D.C., Mohammad Anwar, a 66-year-old Pakistani immigrant, was killed in a failed carjacking attempt by two black female teenagers who were aged 15 and 13 respectively, which is tragic in and of itself given their young age. He was killed while working, trying to provide for his family as an UberEats driver. I'm about to play the video, which is disturbing due to the total disregard for his life and property, although I will admit it's not graphic in nature by any serious means, but it's only a minute long. I'll play it and give my commentary on it, as well as the emerging controversy that is surrounding this incident that is now being waged online. So without further ado, I'll play the video.
She's stealing their car. Yeah, call the cops. It's been called. It's been called. It's been called. It's been called. They stole the car. They stole the car. They stole the car. They stole the car. He's the car. That's it.
All right, that's all there is to the video. Very disturbing. And what's even worse, aside from what they committed, what they just did, you saw them accelerate the car with Muhammad still clinging to the side of the car and smashing against the side. No regard for his safety when they accelerated after trying to steal the car. But what's even worse towards the end, if you heard it, this girl right here, I'm not too sure if she's the 13 or 15-year-old involved, although I believe she was the passenger in the seat at the time. You heard her say, my phone's in the car. She's more concerned about her phone as opposed to just a few feet away, lying motionless and dying, Mohammad Anwar there, whom she helped put in that position. She could care less about her phone. Care less about his condition, what she did, and the fact that he's just lying there motionless, dying. Which says a lot about the depravity of our country, where we're at. Let me minimize this. It's very sad what happened. Again, 13 and 15-year-old respectively. Where are the parents at? How can kids that young, be roaming free in a city like Washington, D.C. that is riddled with a lot of crime and violence, mind you? Yes, it's the nation's capital technically, but it is a lot of violence going on in said city, and yet 13 and 15-year-olds are allowed to just roam freely. Where are the parents at? What kind of parents would raise kids to have that much disregard for property and life? What makes them think that it's okay to steal a man's car while he's working, try to tase him, and then drive off while he's clinging to the car, and then care so little about his safety? On top of that, they continue to not care about how he's doing by saying, where's my phone? Where's my phone? My phone's in the car, and not even tending to him. In fact, no one's really tending to him immediately for a while. With all of the criticism of the occupation of the nation's capital, with all of the National Guard still occupying the city for as long as they have, I will say it is fortunate that in this instance that they've been around and were, in this case here, to apprehend the girls as soon as the incident had occurred, although they weren't there during the robbery itself, but they were positioned at the point where the accident occurred to get them out and apprehend them and move as many people away from the situation as possible. Another concern I do have regarding what happened is the people who were sitting there watching while the robbery was occurring. While it is great to have the video evidence of practically the entire situation as it went down, we don't know how the girls got in the car or got in the position to be in the driver and passenger seat while Anwar was out. Likelihood he left the keys in the car, got out to deliver the food or pick up the food, one of the two, and they jumped in. But we got pretty much everything after the fact to bring these two girls to justice. But I'm pretty sure that Muhammad Anwar and his family would have much preferred that the individuals watching actually tried to help. Because I'm not too sure. We don't know if the passenger side was locked, but we don't even see the person who's recording even attempt to open the passenger side of the door to get the girl on the passenger side out and apprehend her. Because it is a pretty good likelihood that the person who was behind the wheel would not have taken off and accelerated had her girlfriend or sister, whatever their relationship is, was being apprehended on the other side of the car. So there was no attempt by anyone to help. It wasn't a big crowd, but it was enough. I counted at least three people in the area. The person recording, who was a male, because we can tell by his voice as he's running down the street to say, "We already reported it, we already reported it." There was definitely a woman there as well beside him. And then we also saw in the video footage, there was another man who was jogging and coming up on the scene. Now, he came late. He probably didn't see what was going on, but at least two people who were right there the whole time saw what was going on and did nothing. So where are we as a society at where individuals would rather sit back and record a crime or assault happen as opposed to actually stepping in and assist? Sad to say that that's happening here in the United States. I hope that that's not occurring in countries for people who I know watch my video in Australia and the United Kingdom and Germany and France. I hope that this is just a United States issue, in which case we do need to address. So that's the story. That's what happened, unfortunately, over the weekend. And as far as the controversy surrounding this, is as you can probably tell from this tweet here from Melissa Tate, a lot of people who identify as conservative Republicans or just Republicans in general have been severely triggered by this CNN. Let me go to the CNN post or tweet. They've been triggered by the CNN tweet. Their responses, I don't think, are helping the cause or the conversation or contributing to the dialogue in any way. What triggered them about this CNN tweet regarding the article is how they headlined the tweet. Now, mind you, I read the article, and when you read the article, they do state too that the teenage girls were charged with murder when you read the article. But it's the headline and the tweet itself, because we're living in a nation and or a society as a whole that is mostly generated by headline readers, individuals who either only read the headlines or use the headlines to filter and read the rest of the article or as much of the article, filter and or influence how they're viewing it. And in the headline, I will admit, they do things in this particular case that they would not do in other situations where they blatantly don't do. And you have people on the right who are then just playing the same game, just in reverse. It doesn't really help the conversation, but what triggered them in particularly, let me highlight, one of the things that they're triggered by is by the fact that this tweet is trying to label this as an accident. I know, playing semantics. This was not really an accident. Did the girls plan for this? Plan to crash the car? No. They did not seek out to crash the car. They may not have even sought out to kill Mohammad Anwar. But this was vehicular homicide. There was total disregard for his life. And yet they're trying to, again, frame this as an accident that led to a fatal injury, as opposed to the vehicular homicide and total disregard for his life for what it was. But no need to get triggered and hung up on the word accident. But that's one thing that's triggering them, is I think they wanted it to be labeled as vehicular homicide. But CNN is trying to, I guess, humanize the perpetrators in this case by saying it was an accident. They didn't mean to, trying to put in some plausible deniability for the perpetrators. Another thing that is triggering those on the right and or identified as Republicans is the fact that the ethnicity of the perpetrators were left to the imagination. They're just identified as girls. When we know for a fact that in situations where the perpetrator is white, they go all out of the way in the headlines to say, white male killed person of color, and then try to attribute it to race. We've seen them do that recently, for instance, with the shooting in Atlanta. And why do I point to the shooting in Atlanta? Is because while there have been headlines about a rash increase in violence across the country, as in violence has been increasing across the country over the last year due to the pandemic or due to the lockdowns, because when you lock down the country and shut down businesses, people are going to react likely violently, especially when you put them into poverty, force them out of employment. Increases in violence then and desperation then follow. Naturally, violence, as it increases overall, people in particular communities are also going to be on the end of that. Asian hate crimes or Asian attacks on Asian Americans or Chinese Americans have been on the receiving end of that increased violence. Nothing is said about the perpetrators when they're people of color, which happen to be over 90% of those times, as centered or mentioned here in this article, as it alludes to in New York City, for instance. Of the 20 people arrested for attacks against Asian Americans, only 2 were white. 2 out of 20 is 10%. 11 were African Americans, 6 were Hispanic, and then 1 Black Hispanic. In other words, 18 out of the 20 were people of color. 90% people of color. This is the trend across the country, and this is happening in liberal cities like New York City, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. 90% Black, meaning they're not getting their marching orders from Trump. They can care less what Trump is saying. They're likely Democrats, if they even pay attention or follow politics at all, but they definitely don't follow Trump. But they never mention the ethnicity when the perpetrators are Black and or Hispanic, and yet the less than 10% of the time when the perpetrator is white, they will say white perpetrator, as in the case with Trevor Noah and the incidents in the Atlanta shooting, which I'll play the video briefly for a few moments.
This is truly horrifying. 8 people dead, 6 of them Asian women. And soon we'll learn all about them and who they were in life, but all we know right now is that they are dead, and a 21-year-old white man with a gun killed them. And what's been sad about the story is not just the loss of life, but all of the auxiliary things that have been happening around the story. You know, like one of the first things that's been the most frustrating for me is seeing the shooter say, oh, it wasn't racism, it was sex addiction. First of all, you, man. You killed 6 Asian people. Specifically, you went there. If there's anyone who's racist, it's a mother who kills 6 Asian women. Your murders speak louder than your words.
So clearly we have the left who will not hesitate to go to race when the perpetrator is white, even though not only does the perpetrator specifically say, this has nothing to do with race, this is a sex addiction. And keep in mind, not all of the people who were murdered were Asian. 2 were white as well. It just so happens the makeup of the employees at this massage parlor were 6 Asians, 2 whites who were working at that time. And yet Trevor Noah and those on the left had no problem identifying the perpetrator as a white male and trying to label this as racist, even though, again, the perp clearly said, I have nothing against Asians, I just have a sex addiction. This had nothing to do with anything other than my raging out as a sex addict and hoping for that infamous happy ending. But it does nothing to further the conversation, further us as a society, for us to then, for anyone to then lash out against the other side by saying, well, y'all are quick to label something as racist on one end. Why aren't y'all doing the same thing when the perpetrators are people of color? They go out of their way to protect perps when they're Black or Hispanic, and yet are quick to throw them under the bus. I get it. I get the frustration. The left should not be doing that. And they do play a big role in the negative discourse in the United States and around the world as it pertains to race relations. But it really doesn't advance the conversation, doesn't advance us as a society to then just start politicizing an issue. I think we can all agree what happened to Mohammad Anwar was tragic. Those two girls need to be persecuted and charged to the fullest extent. We need to make sure something like this does not happen again. Again, where are the families at? Where are the parents? How are we raising kids? What's happening with the structure of the family and the teaching of morals that not only can young youth be roaming around the city freely without any supervision or any accountability, but that they would even have that lack of regard for human life. Who's raising them? What are their morals being taught? Where are we as a society where we would rather record a crime or assault as opposed to helping? Why are we race baiting in one scenario and calling out the perpetrator's race and pointing to race as the issue, even when the perpetrators themselves say that had nothing to do with my crime? It was just a crime for this issue, nothing with that. And yet they go out of their way to hide the race of perpetrators when it doesn't fit their narrative. Yeah, we do need to identify all of those issues, but we need to stop with the politicization of everything. And I'll say one more thing on the issue of politicization. The mayor of D.C. did no favors. Her only response, so let me mute that. Her only response in the wake of what happened to Mohammad Anwar since the tragic incident over the weekend was this tweet right here, where she pretty much more or less blamed him or blamed victims by saying, these are the things you need to do to prevent auto thefts. Tip number one, let me play the video. So tip number one, park in a safe spot. So you should be more aware of where you park. Tip number two, lock your car. Tip number three, keep track of your keys. Tip number four, never leave your engine running. And tip number five, stay alert. At no point since what tragically happened to Mohammad Anwar in her city did she ever give her condolences to him or seek justice for him and his family or condemn the acts of those teenage girls and the parents that let them roam the city or try to get to the bottom of this. She didn't respond as quickly as she did for, let's say, Capitol Officer Brian Sicknick, who died shortly after what happened in the event that shall not be named before YouTube comes after me in the algorithm again. She did not come back as quickly like she did in that scenario, even though Brian Sicknick was not killed. One of the things they're keeping quiet right now is the fact that there is no cause of death. There was not a single cause of trauma found anywhere on his body. So they're still trying to figure that out. But she was quick to point the finger of his death to the individuals who were there in Washington at that time and give her sympathies to the surviving family members of Brian Sicknick, but nothing for Mohammad Anwar, probably because, again, who the perpetrators were. And so it's kind of sad when politics get in the way on both sides. But again, we really need to come together as a people, stop with the division and the politicizing of events or attacking each other. We do need to call out hypocrisy where it lies, but only when really it is needed to. But I say let's just keep the focus on Mohammad Anwar and his family, on how this occurred, how we can prevent this from happening again, and making sure that justice is sought. We do need to put his name out there because he does need to be remembered in the same way that the media puts a lot of attention on other individual names like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. His name should be out there as well. There should be consistency on that. Let's remember his family that's surviving. It's very tragic what happened. There is a GoFundMe page for his family. I'll try to put the link for that in the description box of this video. This is Bruce the Boss Brooks. I'm back after a little time out. I was placed on by YouTube. Good to be back. If you're not yet subscribed to my channel, please don't forget to smash on that subscribe button. Like this video, comment on this video. This is Bruce the Boss Brooks, and I'm out. Peace.